If people are able to feel some of the emotion I felt when I made that call, I think it also helps them understand what's going on. I try to be there for the family at the moment it happens, and then I need to focus on the other ones that need my immediate help. What's difficult with COVID is that a lot of times with life-threatening situations, we're used to having the families there in the unit. So with this new world we live in, we have to find a way to communicate accurately and in a sensible way very hard news like this. Then we often start by saying that we have some terrible news, and there's no nice way to say it. When a loved one has died, that's the message that you have to convey first. I think everyone is feeling a bit isolated right now. People have the right to know what happens in the hospital. They're all part of what's happening anyways. They have family there that they can't see. So I hope I'm able to bridge the gap. I just hope I can bring some positivity to what's happening by having others relate to some of the emotions I'm feeling. Hopefully we all get through this together.
Good Monday morning to you all. Welcome to another edition of Let It Be Known. We start this Monday morning with some breaking news on the COVID front. Pfizer has just said a few minutes ago that a phase 2 trial showed its COVID-19 vaccine was safe and generated a robust antibody response in children ages 5 to 11. These are the first such results released for this age group for a U.S. COVID-19 vaccine. And the data has not yet, of course, been peer-reviewed or published, but Pfizer said it plans to submit to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization. So again, breaking news, Pfizer has just released, just moments ago, its phase 2 trial, which shows that COVID-19 vaccine is safe and generated a robust antibody response in children ages 5 to 11. As we recall earlier this year, they started a vaccine for children 12 and over, and now with school opening up or have reopened, it is vital that these young ones are vaccinated. So we'll continue to monitor this. You can read more about it later today at blackpressusa.com, and I'm sure many of our member papers throughout the Black Press of America will have more on this development in the vaccines for young kids. University of Pennsylvania professor Amrita Subramanian will speak with us this morning on his first of its kind study to explore growing through the pain of the pandemic and our shared experience. The professor, she is known for her literature, her personal experiences, and she bases all of this findings on those research that she has done. She also shows how we can come out of the pandemic stronger and with a renewed sense of identity, purpose, and community. We will talk to the professor later this morning. But first, the news. The first Black police chief in Waterloo, Iowa, is facing intense opposition from some current and former officers as he works with city leaders to reform the department. And that includes the removal of its longtime insignia that resembles a Ku Klux Klan dragon. Joe Fitzgerald says his 16-month tenure in Waterloo, a city of 67,000 with a history of racial divisions, is a case study for what Black police chiefs face as they seek to build community trust and hold officers to a higher standard. In an interview, he said the attacks were driven by misinformation and racism toward him and his boss, the city's first Black mayor. The chief says I don't think there's been any police chief in America in a small or medium-sized department that have endured this for the reasons I have endured it. And I think the reasons have to do with race. So we'll continue also to monitor that situation out in Waterloo. A grand jury has indicted 2 Central California police officers on felony assault charges in the alleged beating of a Black teenager so severe that he was left with massive bruising on his face. The San Joaquin County District Attorney announced over the weekend. Tori Verber Salazar and former Stockton Police Department officer Michael Stiles and Omar Villapadua were each indicted on felony counts of assault by a public officer and assault with force likely to cause great bodily injury. The men were fired in March after a police investigation found that they had used excessive force on Devin Carter, a 17-year-old at the time. The incident happened outside the department's training and policy guidelines, the police commissioner said. This grand jury indictment reminds us all that when police use unlawful force, they undermine community trust, the district attorney said in a statement. As the daughter of a police officer, I know how important that responsibility is to restore community trust, safety, and honor to the profession, she said. The charges come amid growing outrage in the U.S. over the use of excessive force, especially against African Americans. In April, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder in the 2020 death of George Floyd. And Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison. Out in California, the police union, of course, condemned the indictment of the officers. And again, that's something else you can read at blackpressusa.com and many of our member newspapers around the country. This morning, our thoughts are with comedian and actor Chris Rock and talk show host Wendy Williams, as both have confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis. Chris Rock appeared online to urge vaccination. Also, reports over the weekend claimed that the Wendy Williams Show hostess will have her mental health evaluated after a voluntary admission to a New York City hospital. In a story that is ongoing twists and turns, Wendy Williams has reportedly been admitted to the hospital for a psychological evaluation. The spokesperson for the Wendy Williams Show shared a statement on its official Instagram page revealing that she had contracted a breakthrough case of COVID-19. The TV and radio veteran will have her mental health evaluated, the statement said. But the reports have also suggested that she had been fully vaccinated and she is asymptomatic and doing well. So further, we know that Wendy Williams is going to delay the start of the 13th season of her popular talk show because of testing positive for the virus. So again, our thoughts go out to Wendy Williams. We hope that she has a speedy recovery. Our thoughts go out to Chris Rock as well, and all of those, so many, battling COVID-19. This morning, we have Professor Amrita Subramanian of the University of Pennsylvania. She joins us to speak on a first-of-its-kind study to explore growing through the pain of the pandemic and shared experience. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, good morning. How lovely to be here. And what a great news to open. Our children now have something that will protect them. I hope it all turns out well and safe. We will see in a few years to come.
Yeah, Pfizer is actually hoping, Professor, that those vaccines will be approved and become available by the end of this calendar year. So we will see. Professor, so you did a study. It speaks, I'm told it speaks, is a first of its kind study to explore growing through the pain of the pandemic and our shared experiences. Can you explain what you found in that study and what do you mean by growing through the pain of the pandemic and our shared experiences?
Thank you for asking it. I think it's a study that's going to take me a lifetime, and I don't have enough life left to do as much, as there are so many things around in the world that we're discovering. So a bit about the study first, and thank you for asking. It is still in the process, and the study looks at three things. The first one is, how has the pandemic created growth for you? And growth is not a given. It is not a guaranteed, because you see, we all go through a rite of passage. And in the pandemic, everything that we have believed about reality, everything we have believed about our way of loving, living, being born, dying, all of this has received a new meaning. So in the study, we are looking at what happens to us when we are with ourselves and we are forced to examine the depth and reality of our life. Now, you see, for many of us, as we know, social isolation or distancing and being forced behind a wall has created a prison within our own homes. And even as we are coming out, we begin to start seeing what is the effect of it in the long term. Now, here are the two things that becomes relevant for our communities of brothers and sisters in African American heritage. Now, when we look at what my history is, what my history is becoming, and where am I located in this moment of time as my history is becoming, are three very important ways to understand that the reality that has been shattered, that has been broken, has a permission for me to choose a newer reality, which is different from all the history I've learned. So in short, it is about how have I grown, who have I become, and do I have a choice to change that that prediction, that stereotype of who I am about to become? Because growth affects in very different ways, and it's not guaranteed that we are all growing. So I'll pause there.
Well, so this study, I understand, has many participants. You're searching for many participants from around the world. Why is that important?
Thank you for asking that. In fact, if the viewers are here, and I welcome you to look at growbeyondpain.com. And David, it's a wonderful question when you say the impact on the soul, because I think it's a very long-term impact and we don't always see it. The reason I am looking for voices around the world. So here's what the study looks at. It looks at an adult experience. You see, the way we have studied growth has so far either been in children or in adults, but it's a college population. It's a certain category which has repeated itself in the studies of growth. In this case, it's a very broad category. I'm looking for people from all walks of life, from all parts of the world. And I don't want to focus on one particular race, on one particular kind, on one particular country. Or the reason is that most of the time the views become very narrow and they don't really have an application from all across. One of a kind study is testing an assumption that when we move into our future, is there a language for it? How are we moving into it? What is the beginning point for me? Because for all of us, Stacey, you, me, the audience here, we all have unique history. Often it is the history that gives us the inspiration to change the way we are moving forward. And often it is our history which tells us we are prisoners to the lessons of the history, which is why, and David, thank you again for asking, the capacity for shared experience, which is we've all gone through pandemic, we've all lost, we are all witnesses of the same loss, or different degrees of severity. But how has it impacted my way of thinking, my way of living, my way of loving? And above all, has it shifted my ability to be present for the other, whoever is the other? I'm of a gender, I could be other to anyone else. I'm of a color, I could be other for someone else. But do I have the capacity for compassion and synthesis? Because we're all broken and we're all shattered in it in different degrees. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, and you mentioned for the first time in modern day history, the world has a shared collective trauma, but we still see, and I hear and grasp what you're saying about this shared trauma. We still see so much divisiveness, particularly along the line of race. And then, of course, for African Americans, Professor, we know that African Americans are disproportionately affected by this virus and many other things. We talk about the climate, whether it's environmental, the climate, of course, whether it's getting medical care or the proper medical care. We have historically been affected more than others, and certainly this pandemic is right there with everything else. So when you see David's comments, he talks about his soul. How does his soul recover? What do you say to that?
Well, the first is to acknowledge that there is no simple answer. Second is to acknowledge that the boot on the soul, if you will, has affected all of us, and especially our brothers and sisters in the community. And the reason I say this a little more is when you zoom out and you look at the whole, You see, one of the things that the media does is constantly tell us what to focus on. It's like a focusing illusion. But and that's also a trick of the mind. When you zoom out and you look at it, the field of play has been uneven from the beginning. So it's almost tilted. So it's almost like Sisyphus. I roll down. Every time I go up, I roll down. Now, when history has been replete with such experiences, it's not just one generation. It travels generation upon generation upon generation. So we inherit the pain from generation. So that's transgenic. That's the first thing to remember. The second thing to also remember is there are certain factors of the setup of society that will not shift in, say, a capitalistic setup. If it's a socialistic setup, if it's something else, we all know how history works there. Because what is raised to United States is something else in another country, something else in another region of the world. But in the United States, when we are looking at the particular factor of race is not just race. It is a host of many other variables. So then how does a society begin to look at healing? The first three things, and I'll keep it to three, which is oversimplifying it, but I offer it to the people who are here to think along with me. The first is to understand that we cannot change everything for everyone at the same time. We cannot do that. That is not also an efficient way of looking at it. A great way to look at it is, and this is going to go back to our indigenous and our native and our ancestors. And when I say our ancestors, it's ancestors for different communities. It is to understand that healing has to be localized. Different communities have to come up with what is working for us. Think of it this way. You have a wall that has been built and has 1,000 keyholes or levers that can open the door. But you have to know which are the three. So we are standing sort of a riddle in time. We've completed the rite of passage and say, you can change so much, but not every door will open as much when you turn the handle. So then as a society, we have to look back at us and say, who are we changing the world for? Are we changing it for our own convenience? Are we changing it for the future generation? Because we're always moving forward in time. History is not about looking at what happened in the past. History is what are some of the things you don't want to do in future. That's the whole point. But most of the time, we forget that what are the three most important things for each generation is different generationally. We are not in a war per se, for example, in our generation. But this is an economic war. This is a social war. This is an emotional war. So war has a different meaning. Is it education? Is it civic rights? Is it going to be health? Or is it going to be looking at the three? And this is getting a little philosophical. On Monday morning, before the coffee hits, you're looking at three questions. A civilization, a human race, Homo sapiens, is going to ask itself, who were we in this civilization when the biggest pandemic hit? How did we treat our children? How did we treat our elderly? And how did we treat those who were less? Because that's the easiest to forget. So I am going to talk more and more as the pandemic comes into play, that this is not going away. This is going to stay for 4 or 5 years. Because you see, one of the stunning things is, Stacey, and many of the viewers might be aware of it, the Spanish flu, which was the Black Plague, was called the Pale Horse Ride, came to 1919 and 1918. On the dot, 2019 and 20, exactly 100 years, we have COVID-19. So the question is, it is exactly the same thing. These are the same choices that our forefathers had also faced, no matter where we were. The question is, if the world has moved so much forward, how is it that we have made the right choices for our children, for those who are our elders of the community, and for those who are less? Because it is there the most wanted in terms of the needs and the fulfillments of wishes is a good indicator of how healthy a society or civilization is. So I think it's both a process and an outcome as to how the society will move forward. I hope this is helpful in how we're thinking and thinking about it, because this is not academic and this is not who has the most dominant voice. It's about truly realizing that the society cannot just jump gun and say, that is what I want to do because I'm the loudest voice. It truly is, who are we doing this for? Because we are the custodians of the future.
Yeah. Well, before I go to the next question, I don't want to ignore what Dave is writing, and he probably has the same question that they heard you mention the pale horse riding. David's asking for, what do you mean by that?
Thank you so much for asking. If you get a chance, and it's not going to be an uplifting read, but Laura Spinney had written this, The Pale Horse Ride. or the Spanish flu. If you want to study about that, that was the title of the book. So if you want to study about that, you can, because it was death traveling, or that was the metaphor, that death was traveling in a robe riding a pale horse, which is a motive that appears in all our ancestral studies. But it is something that you can look in to see when it's a plague, whether it is in 1919 or 2019. You see, there's never a good time for death.
Yeah,
there is never a good time for death,
yeah.
whether in pandemic or out of pandemic.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Professor. The pale horse. It also comes from that the Book of Revelations in the Bible.
Thank you for saying it. Yes.
Professor, you mentioned the differences we see in others. Isn't it also true that the pandemic has increased the amount of introspection we're experiencing as individuals?
Well, let's look at it this way. We would like to believe that we have become more reflective and introspective as individuals. One of the things is also that it is not true for all of the folks, because to introspect is to examine my reality and then acknowledge and change it. But for many, it has increased anxiety, it has increased depression, it has increased mental agitation. And one of the things is also that our ability to look at how we deal with intentional or unintentional change is not an equal capacity for all of us. So for instance, pandemic puts in, I noticed a question about the future of work and how things are going to change. And I'll address that a little later. But the entire spectrum of dis-ease, which is what fractures us as opposed to what creates to renewal of growth. For each one of us, that's the question station. Am I growing or am I fractured by this process? Because when the fracturing happens, there are, again, three things that typically get affected. Our primary assumption of truth in the world, or how we feel that we have a right to be, or the sense of belonging that is such a conversation today, is the world meaningful or continues to be meaningful in and outside of pandemic? Second, the world is fair. Now, applied to our communities, the world is not fair, but that's an assumption. The third is I am worthy. I'm worthy of good things. I'm worthy of a good history. I'm worthy of a good future. Now, in the pandemic, no matter what language we use, no matter what images we use, all of us have asked these questions. What is the purpose? Why am I alive? What do we do now? Everything that I had known before is no longer true.
And Bobby Henry asks, Bobby Henry is our publisher down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He publishes the West Side Gazette, one of the NNPA member newspapers. He asks, what will the world look like after COVID? Non-contact and lack of socialization needs in-depth study. And your response?
Thank you, Bobby, and a shout out to the thoughtfulness of the question. Well, let me put it this way. Non-contact and social isolation is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other behaviors that have become amplified because of this particular forced. And I also give a shout out that unchecked introspection can create outward destruction. So if we look at what the world is going to be after COVID, you have to look at what is the relationship of myself to the world. If there's an internal GPS, and this is for Bobby as much as for all the viewers, if there is an internal GPS, it has 3 points. What is my relationship to myself? What is my relationship to others? And others includes everyone. Those I love, those I work with, those I live with, the community I've grown up with. And the third is, what's my place in the world? Now, these 3 questions will create not just, and usually we think it's the individual behavior. It's not that. The whole world moves in groups. It's important to understand. That's why, it's not just a story of one African American who has a higher chance of being incarcerated than one Caucasian, one Asian, or any other racial construct. The reason I am mentioning this particular point is, you see, when we look at who am I and where am I going to be after COVID, we think it's an individual choice. Not always true. It's individual, it's interpersonal, which is my relationship with the others. And third, it's the group and the whole world. So it's constantly 3 layers that are working together. The individual is shaping the collective, and the collective is shaping the individual. While it is a complex, and that's why Stacey has said it's not an easy answer. The easy thing is to think about this easily. What I like to think, I will think about it. It's easy to me. But that necessarily does not position me for the aspiration I have that the world is a fairer place when we move forward. Yes, it requires in-depth studying, but it requires studying from all aspects, from all corners of the world and all layers of the world, not just the public institutions. And I will say this out loud, not just the institutions who have created a right to study, but those who have a voice to study, a more democratic way of studying about these things. Because you see, academia is rooted in the past, and that is the richness of it. But that does not mean it has all the answers for the future, because certain answers, because of the process of academia, are more favored than the others. This is the time we have to stop looking at what is comfortable, what is known, what is easy, and really let's look at some of the questions, not because they're hard, but because it's even hard to understand the question. Does that make sense to you? And Bobby, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. And before we have a few minutes left, but before we close out, we want to bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavez. Good morning, Dr. Chavez.
Good morning, Stacey Brown, and we thank our guests for being on the Black Press of America. I'm in Detroit this morning meeting with General Motors. I'm glad I was able to get on for a few minutes to greet our guests, and please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor, so it's growbeyondpain.com. Again, how many volunteers are you looking for this study, and explain the type of volunteers you're looking for?
Well, volunteer is not really what I'm looking for, Stacey, but I love the way you have framed it. It is a place, so if you are currently logged into this, if not, I would recommend you do. It's Grow Beyond Pain. And the moment you go in, you will notice there is a short survey. It is not a survey that is a casual one. It might make you think a bit. So sit down with your cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is you prefer and ask yourself, how has my thinking changed? How has my feeling changed? And how is it that I'm aware? You see, for most of us, and Stacey, this goes back to the point that you and Bobby both made about empathy, and David was also talking about empathy. How I realize how I have changed is not an awareness easily available to people. Look at our lives, screen upon screen upon screen upon screen upon screen. So when you come to this survey and you log in, you might have to sit down and ask yourself, what has happened to my body? What has happened to my emotions? Do I know? Can I articulate it? This is just the first phase of the survey. After the survey, it might take you more than 4 or 5 minutes. So that's the range. After the survey is an interview with me. And perhaps if you're willing, another short survey to understand, can you understand your own growth? So this is not so much about me doing something for the participant. It is about the participant saying, I would like to discover a little more about who I have become. That's why this is such a unique study, because the knowledge rests with you, not with someone who's doing the study, but really you will discover who you are in a very, very massive way.
Yep, she is a trailblazer in the field of post-disruptive growth and a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania and a lecturer at the Wharton School of Business. Dr. Amrita, we really appreciate you this morning. Dr. Chavez, I'm going to give you some closing thoughts as you spend your day in Detroit, the Motor City.
Well, thank you. And again, on behalf of Karen Carter Richards and all of the members of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Karen Carter Richards is our distinguished chair. Professor, again, thank you. Can you just emphasize the importance of research? You said that people can find out more about themselves. We seem to live in an era where there's anti-intellectualism, there's anti-science. Can you talk about the importance of people not only getting professional help, but also paying attention to science rather than myths, innuendo, and falsehoods?
Dr. Chavez, I cannot thank you enough for asking that question. And I'll say this briefly. This is quite a conversation and can last days, but I will say this. Science is our way of looking at things from all angles, whereas mythology, innuendos are preferred ways of thinking because they're comfortable to our sanity. Most of the time, if you remember this, we are all in boxes right now, right, on our screen. That is how the mind also works. Remember this symbol. I say, this is the box of reality. Anything that is outside of this box, I will not tolerate because that's too much of stress on my sanity. That is also called a bounded way of looking at the world. Now, for most of us, because the craziness of the world is so large, and this is practicing compassion, is to understand my fears have really drawn a very tight boundary on how much I can take in. So science can only find a way, if these boundaries disappear and are permeable, that you and I can examine the opposite point of view. And I'm taking sort of an example to say, you might be saying something opposite, but we as a species, Dr. Savage, are the only species who can go to the farthest end of our thought, the opposite, examine it, and understand it. Understanding does not mean acceptance, but understanding means I acknowledge that there are perspectives that are different. At the end of the day, who are we, if not people with a point of view, at best?
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Amrita. We really, really appreciate you this morning. Dr. Chavez, we thank you for joining in. We know you're busy out there, always taking care of NNPA business. We appreciate you and your leadership. And don't forget to check out the NNPA and the Black Press of America on TikTok at NNPA Black Press, where the fabulous Howard University student Carrington York manages the TikTok account for the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Let it be known. Remember this, when big business today start talking about labor shortages, well, try this. Hire those felons who have systemically been kept from getting employed because of their backgrounds. Everyone stay safe. And remember the big news today. Check out blackpressusa.com. At the top of the news today is the fact that Pfizer has now moved along a vaccine for children 5 to 11 years old. We'll have much more on that on this program as well. We will see you tomorrow.